So I'm down here in Florida visiting my parents, and I thought I'd use this opportunity, as some of my patrons have encouraged me, to sit down with my father and get him to tell the complete story of his time as a Marine Corps attack pilot. So here you go.
Among the things that I used to see and as a boy were Grumman Avengers flying over the house, flying over the farm. And I loved it. I said, I've got to go do that and I looked today at the Grumman Avenger and I said, wow, it's a big airplane. But the first airplane that I really liked was the Luscombe Silver. This was after World War II, and I was probably about 13 years old, and I grabbed a ride in a Luscombe Silver. Now that Silver was an all-metal monoplane, high-winged, and the flight was probably 15 minutes, but lasted forever in my heart.
It comes time to choose a college. You chose Michigan State.
I did choose Michigan State with police ed as a major. I thought to be a policeman was a high calling, and I still do today, by the way. And so I did go to school thinking I would come out of Michigan State and probably join the Michigan State Police.
So sometime, make sure I got the chronology right, during your senior year, you hear about this program, the Navcad program. So talk to us about the specifics of how you got into...
It's a little more serious than that. Basic ROTC, which was part of Michigan State, you as a male over 21 had to belong to ROTC for the first 2 years in a land-grant college, which Michigan State is. And so I was in Army ROTC for 2 years. After that, the ROTC requirement goes away. For your junior and senior years, you needn't belong to an ROTC unit. But Air Force ROTC was there in advance. And so I made application to become part of the Air Force ROTC program at Michigan State and was accepted. Now, as part of that Air Force ROTC, between your junior and senior years, you had to go to a summer camp. And I was ordered to go to Barksdale Air Force Base in Shreveport, Louisiana, which was a SAC base. And I got there, and B-47s and B-52s were there. And as I recall, it was a 4 or 6 week course, escape and survival, and all of the things that a young officer would need to know to be good. During that time, and I have to back a little, my grandfather was sending me to college. My parents did not have the money, and so my grandfather was sending me to college. Unfortunately, he passed away during the time I was at Barksdale. So that meant that senior year was going to be difficult financially, because ordinarily I worked during the summertime and was able to save a bit of money and at least pay for my first semester myself. I struggled a bit my first semester as a senior at Michigan State, and I finally knew this second semester was not going to work out. I was not going to be able to continue to graduate. At that time, the draft was still a very live thing, and I knew I didn't want to be drafted. I wanted to do something.
So this is the mid-50s. What is this, 54, 55?
1955. Luckily, about the time this was all happening, the Navy had a recruiter at our student union. And so I chatted with this guy for a bit, and he said, for you, we've got a deal. And that deal was Naval Aviation Cadet Program. He showed me pictures of the guys swimming and swimming pool and officers club and tennis. And I thought, this would have my name written all over it. I said, well, where's this guy been? I could have done this years ago. And the only requirement was you had to have had 2 years of college. And so I said, I'm fat for that one. I went down to Grosse Ile Naval Air Station and took the test required. So the next thing I knew, I had a set of orders, then reported to the training battalion, 3rd Battalion at Pensacola, and met my first nice guys, and these guys were Marines, a master sergeant and a gunnery sergeant. And they didn't like me, I guess, because they yelled at me and And I realized that those pictures I'd seen of the beach and things were a far way away. So the next thing I knew, I was ordered to Whiting Field to fly the SNJ, which was a training aircraft, the old Air Force Texan. I soloed in it. I then went into the acrobatic phase. Then from acrobatics, we went into gunnery and carrier qualification.
You CQ'd with the SNJ?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep, on the Monterey. And I finally went to advanced training in Corpus Christi. Flew the T-33 a little, believe it or not, and then we reverted back to the T-28s to do instruments, and then back into the T-33 to kind of do jet instruments. Then from that, we went into the F-9, F-5 Panthers. At one of the crucial times in my military life, I was in a hangar down in Barron Field, which is in Alabama, and Barron Field is where we did our gunnery. Steps came behind me, and I turned around and stood at attention because there's the senior Marine at Barron was there, and he said, "Good evening, cadet." I said, "Good evening, sir." And he said, "You ever thought about being a Marine?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I have thought about it, but didn't think I'd have an opportunity." He said, "Well, let me give you an opportunity." To make that long story short, they held a board. I went to the board. They asked me a group of questions like, why would you like to be a Marine? What did you want to fly? What would you do? And one of the key questions I remember at that time was one of the questioners asked me, what would you do if a platoon was under fire and you had to provide close air support and knew you probably weren't going to make it through it? And you all know the answer already. They said, "Oh, yes, sir, I'd do that." And so they said, "Well, thank you very much, cadet," and I marched out. And several weeks later, they informed me that I was now a Marcad, that I had been accepted to be a Marine officer. But it's notable that before that meeting ever took place, my first instructor had been a Marine who I admired very much, and subsequently I had several other Marine instructors, and all of whom were really sharp guys.
Somewhere in your training, one day you get the word, "Hey, go get commissioned."
Your job as a flight student is fly, 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 and you don't do much as far as how's my career going or anything like that, because your career goes one flight at a time. Pass it satisfactorily, then you get to go to the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And you never know where this infinity, apparently, is going to end. And this one day they said, "Okay, you're it. Your papers are up at headquarters." And they were. And so it was very quick. Walked out of that headquarters, a second lieutenant, got my first salute, paid the guy $1, as I recall, and then a couple of days later, I reported to Corpus Christi, where they had a large ceremony and a winging of all of the guys who'd gone to Corpus, Chase, or Kingsville all came together. We got winged. Then I thought, okay, where am I going? I got my orders. Naval Air Station, Pensacola to Florida again. So I was what they called a plowback. I went back as an instructor, and that's an 18-month tour. And during that period, almost when I was getting ready to leave, I met your mother. When I saw this beautiful lady, I said, oh boy. And she had another year to finish in school, but I kind of knew after my years of playing around as a bachelor, and you could do a lot of playing as a bachelor instructor in Pensacola. I didn't mind doing, the church and all of those things. At any rate, your mother and I fell in love real fast. My time as a flight instructor was quickly coming to an end. We were ordered to Marine Corps Air Station, El Toro, California, and found out at that juncture that you were coming. And so we then packed the car and headed west to California. And when we got to California, I reported to the 3rd Marine Aircraft Wing, and was assigned to Marine Aircraft Group 15. They said, you're going to fly the FJ-4. 4 was later, very soon thereafter, changed to an FJ-4B, going from a fighter configuration to an attack configuration. As a matter of fact, an atomic attack configuration. In the late 50s, the threat of a Cold War was deep in, and so everything was going to be nuclear. And so suddenly fighters were modified to nuclear and so forth. And so the FJ, I went from doing air-to-air work to suddenly flying at low levels, doing idiot maneuvers. We call them idiot loops, and so forth. But that is.
So you're flying the FJ-4B in VMF, which?
223.
Okay.
VMA. They changed it to VMA because we were now an attack squadron.
And what was that squadron called? What was the mascot of that one?
It was a bulldog with a boxing glove. Unfortunately, we had an Air Force exchange pilot, and I don't know whether he over-G'd or because of the number of idiot loops the airplane had flown, but during a maneuver, the wing collapsed in flight. We lost him, we lost the aircraft, and the FJ was suddenly dropped down to a 2G airplane. So we all became experts in instrument flying and so forth and all. You could not maneuver the airplane. You couldn't put 4Gs on it, which were required for nuclear deliveries. And so the FJ was on its way out. But before it got out, I was called up to headquarters of 3rd Marine Aircraft Wing, and the General Roberts, Carson Roberts, needed a new aide. I was interviewed, and voila, I went as an aide. And it was interesting too because I was surrounded by World War II guys. The general had been at Wake Island, and he'd been at Tarawa, and the assistant wing commander was an ace, and the legal officer, and so on and so forth. All of these guys, probably the last opportunity that anybody ever had to sort of feel like in the shadow of glory. And so I had that job for probably another 18 months, and then somebody had the audacity to look at my record and say, hey, that bozo has not been overseas yet. Now, as it's pretty well known, Marine Corps overseas tours are unaccompanied, which means that you kiss your family goodbye and you go over and you have a year or as much as 18 months of an unaccompanied tour. And so I was ordered to Marine Attack Squadron 211.
So this is your first look at the A4.
Right, and so as normal, I was sent to a school that tells you about the A4, engines, systems, everything. Before you ever fly it, you go for 2 weeks of work with the school, and then go into an operational flight trainer, MOFT, and fly the A4 with a little link trainer, as they call it. And then I think indoctrination flights, maybe 6 flights, in which you're chased, and then you're a squadron pilot.
So there wasn't like a full-up RAG syllabus like we think of today.
You went back after you'd finished your MOFT and the school, then you went back to the squadron, and you had a squadron guy. I think they had maybe 4 guys were designated as instructors, squadron instructors. And they went through that, and as I remember, it's a 6-flight syllabus, and then you were a A4 squadron pilot. And then it's up to the squadron commander to look at you one day and say, okay, you're a section leader, and then a division leader, and then a flight leader. Little, sub-designations. And I had quite a few hours because of being a flight instructor. And so compared to most of my contemporaries who'd maybe been lucky to get 25 hours a month, I was getting 125, and so I had a lot of hours, and I made my flight designations pretty fast.
Now, in VMA 211, you did a transpac, one of a number of both Transpacs and Trans-Lance that you did during your career. Talk to us about that first experience.
Well, it was exciting because, like any pioneering venture, there's a bit of unsureness about how it's going to work out. We initially went from El Toro to aerial refueling control points off of C-130s and on into Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii. And so we sort of island hopped across the Pacific, landing at Wake Island, Guam, and finally Japan itself.
So that was a big deal at the time.
It hadn't been done before.
Okay.
The first guys that did it were in F-8 Crusaders, and they lost a bird right between Hawaii and El Toro.
What model of A4 are you flying at this time?
A4E, or if you want, at the time was an A4D2N. We flew that airplane over during that year in Japan, did a lot of conventional weapons work on the islands of Japan itself, which later on they closed down all of the weapons delivery targets, and we had to move to other places in Korea and in Okinawa to do our weapons delivery. The Mark 80 series bombs, 81, 82, 83, and 84. Zuni rockets, the 5-inch rockets, the 2.75-inch folding fin aerial rockets, the tiny TEMs they're called, and strafing with the 20mm cannons that the A4 had.
So get back home after that.
Back to El Toro, and when I arrived at El Toro, they said, we're starting up a conventional weapons delivery school, and we want you to be, because of your experience, you to be one of our instructors. Previously, it pretty much had been a nuclear school. It now expanded to the conventional weapons, and we worked up a conventional weapons syllabus that included the different weapons delivery methods, high angle, low angle, and strafing, and the whole thing about conventional weapons delivery. And the attack pilots then had to go to that school several times during their training syllabus, including usually a week school each time they went. And during that period, they would get everything that we knew and could pass on about those things. And also, incidental to that, every time one of those squadrons went on a weapons deployment, one of us went with that squadron as a representative of the wing to both teach and see what's happening and to correct where necessary. As a matter of fact, just as Vietnam was starting, I took a detachment of my people, the Matu guys, and we went out to Hawaii and then out to the 1st Marine Aircraft Wing at Iwakuni. And while I was at Iwakuni, I had orders from my headquarters at Fleet Marine Force Pacific. General Krulak had ordered me to go to Vietnam and to find out what was going on down there. So I hitched a ride in a C-130 and went to Mag 12, which was located at Chu Lai in Vietnam. They were flying on a AM2 matting field, which is an aluminum matting which is joined together on what they thought was a laterite basis. Later on they found this was untrue. When I arrived there, the group commander was not really excited to see me, I don't think, because he thought I was there to inspect his group, which was far from the truth. I was there to gather information that I could transfer back as an air weapons training instructor. I flew several combat missions and got a good taste of both day and night combat operations in Vietnam before I finally came out of there. Came back to El Toro with this knowledge and passed it on.
And that was sort of a vision into your future, because after that Matu tour, you got orders to VMA 121 back to Vietnam, now as part of a squadron instead of a MOTS or a Matu instructor.
Absolutely, yeah. By now I was a major, and so I became operations officer of 121.
So 121 plays heavily in your career, we will see going forward.
121 was about to play a very important role in my future. Again, another Transpac, stopping at Midway this time, as I recall, instead of Wake Island. We got to Japan, and guess what? They took our A4Es and gave them to some guys in Vietnam, one of the squadrons that was working in Vietnam, gave us their A4Cs and told us to hold your horses, 121. You guys just wait up here in Iwakuni. So we went, as I think was from July until December, every now and then feeding a group into Vietnam to fly some missions. But in the meantime, letting us fly these A4Cs, which were to us old airplanes with a J65 instead of a J52 engine, and slow acceleration and a lot of things about it. So finally, in December of 66, after 5 months at Iwakuni, we saddled up and moved to Chulai as a squadron and got our A4Es back.
You're operating on the same matting runways.
By now there was a concrete Chulai, but the Phantoms on another air group were using that runway, and so for the most part we operated off of the AM2 matting. But as I indicated before, they suddenly discovered that laterite we thought it was, which they thought it was not laterite at all, but plain old red mud. And after the monsoon came and water got on that mud, the mud became squishy. And so as an airplane landed on it, mud would squirt out the sides, and pretty soon we had these big dips in the runway. And so they would close half the runway down, and we started operating every takeoff with JATO, jet-assisted takeoffs. And you would get the airplane rolling at 80 knots, and you would punch the firing button and look up in your mirror, and you should have two blue lights back there of the rockets going. And if you didn't have two in there, you were going to have to eject, no doubt about it. And many guys tried to fly the airplane with only getting one fire, and nobody made it. You would crash off the end of the runway, and so you were wise to eject before that happened, because if crash off the end of the runway was kind of a fatal thing.
So coming back, did you take arrested landings?
All the landings were arrested. The cable was located a little way down the runway, so you did not fly into the cable. You landed with your hook down, and it dragged down the runway a bit before it hit the cable. And that mobile arresting gear, MOREST, would then you to a stop, and they'd taxi off, and away you'd go.
So let's talk about, because you mentioned the heavy bomb loads, how did your tasking come in? What were the nature of the missions that you would fly? Obviously, you're doing a lot of close air support.
We did a lot of close air support, and at night we would do TPQs, which was radar guidance and radar bombing, and which I think we would probably designate as aerial bombing with an area rather than a close air support in mind. Harassment, supply line interdiction, and sometimes troop assemblies or suspected assembly areas were all TPQ'd, and these were all done at night, and were easy peasy until there was suddenly we lost our first airplane to a SA-2, a big log-like missile that the enemy moved down near the DMZ, which, by the way, was pretty much where the TPQs were, and they started picking guys off with the SA-2s.
We mentioned that you had been a MAH-2 instructor, coming up with a lot of these close air support tactics in your previous tour, including refining how you worked with the FACs.
Ordinarily now, rather than what we would call a conventional FAC of World War II, who was an infantry officer who suddenly we were getting airborne facts in Vietnam. The bird dog that would mark targets for us. That changed the type of missions we're flying quite a bit. At that time, back at Ma2, we talked a lot about snake eye bombs, which were Mark 82 500-pound bombs that were retarded with a set of fins that would expand and would allow you to fly pretty close to your target before you dropped them and get away before the fragmentation pattern could eat you. We discovered in Vietnam these were not good weapons, because the closer you got, the better shot the enemy got at you. So we discontinued using the snake eyes early on.
One mission in particular, you were awarded a Distinguished Flying Cross. So talk to us about this mission.
Of all of the missions that we didn't think was going to be anything, that was it. On the way over, this was on the 6th of March, 1967, and we would go from our quarters, our tents, to the briefing room. You would brief your flight, then go man and away you'd go. But we would ride over in what were surlices, and on the way over, my wingman and I, Fred Anthony, who was an old friend, another major, and on the way over we looked at the weather, and the weather was just plain rotten. But we got over and they said the mission is on. We briefed for a helicopter escort mission. We were going to take off, go up the Marble Mountain, pick up a group of helicopters, and then do a escort mission, which was essentially separating the flight up and then flying, keeping your nose pointed down. You had somebody pointing down all the way around that flight. You circled the flights at a fairly low altitude and had rockets aboard, which we did. We got down to the flight line after our briefing and took a look at the weather, and Fred and I briefed we would rendezvous after takeoff, because it was obviously going to be an instrument takeoff. And we checked them over. Both aircraft, A4Es, had 4 19-shot, 2.75-inch rocket pods aboard. Manned the aircraft, started them up, checked in, taxied out, took off. We broke out probably about 2,000 to 3,000 feet, did an immediate rendezvous, contacted the direct support center, and they said, your mission has been canceled. We have an emergency mission at Quang Ngai. Now, Quang Ngai was probably 50 miles south and right on the South China Sea. We headed on down there. The Director Support Center turned us over to another guy who was a controller, and obviously was an Arvan that had an accent. He said, I said, what's the weather down there? And he said, they were in a valley, and they were being attacked by adversaries that are up on the hills which surrounded this valley with small arms fire, and they were in big trouble. I said, okay. We went on down, and as they described it, they said they were up this river valley. So I flew out to the South China Sea and found some broken clouds out there and could see the water below me. Fred and I, close formation, dropped down in the water and came back up the river. And you can see where the river was because the water was a different color coming out of that river. And up the river, and we've had about probably a 2,000-foot overcast. And once we got down in that valley, we suddenly discovered that they had an O1 up there that was working with them. Again, an Arvan O1. And so he said he would go mark the target. Boom, the next thing I knew, up on the hills we could see he was marking with white phosphorus. We'd see the smoke. So Fred and I took interval. We broke up, and I made the first run and fired all of my rockets. Bang, that's what was 80 some rockets. They spread in a big pattern, and then I broke off and came on back around and almost hit the hills. I was close, and backed around and told Fred be careful of that. So Fred went in and he fired 2 of his pods and said I couldn't get the other 2 off, but he thought he could with one more run. So I said, okay. So we came around again, and I strafed this time with 100 rounds of 20 millimeter high explosive incendiary shots up into that area where that smoke was. And the bird dog said, "You're getting fire." I said, "Okay." And so that was not abnormal anyway. And so I bucked around. Fred went in, shot his other 2 rocket pods. We said, "That's it for today. Thank you. We're ammo minus. We're out of ammunition." Climbed back up, joined up, went back home, and debriefed. And I thought, it's I've just a home mission, doing it all the time, all day long, and and not what you would even call a perfect mission, because it was impromptu. And so we got back home, and about a month later, I was transferred to the First Wing headquarters in Da Nang, and I was the weapons officer, because again, my Ma 2 background, they needed a weapons officer, so they looked around and they found me. And so I went up there. Probably late in my tour, they said, "Oh, by the way, you won the DFC." And I said, "Yeah."
So who initiated the award?
The Arvin,
guys on the Arvin guys?
Yeah,
Okay.
I guess. Because somebody told Fleet Marine Force Pacific, which was in Hawaii, that we had these 2 wonderful guys. And as I read my citation, it chronicles that we killed a bunch of North Vietnamese army. Now, that was a time when body count was a big thing. And I have a horrible hunch that body count may have been multiplied. Anyway, they told me, okay, I got my DFC, and always loved the thing, because my old friend who used to kid me about Korea and how a bunch of guys got silver stars, but they always doubted their flying ability because they needed DFCs. At least I had my DFC.
But your Vietnam tour ends. We were living in St. Louis with near Mom's parents in Kirkwood. And you and I managed to catch a couple of World Series games upon your return. We could have seen the Cardinals win the World Series in Game 5. They lost and wound up winning it in Game 7 at Fenway. I was a huge Cardinals fan because of Grandpa Hazy on Mom's side. We wind up moving to Norfolk, and while we're there, you find out that you're getting orders to go be an attaché.
Exactly, yeah. I became officer in charge of the Marine Air Weapons Training Atlantic there, and did that until I had a call from Headquarters Marine Corps, and they said they were going to make me an attaché. And that encompassed almost a year of school, attaché school, and language school.
So we lived in the D.C. area. At that time, we lived in Falls Church for about a year. Exactly. That's where I did 5th grade. And then we wound up moving to The Hague, Den Haag, Netherlands, where you were the assistant naval attaché.
So for the next 3 years, I represented the United States and the United States Marine Corps with essentially both the Dutch Marines and the Dutch Navy.
So one of the highlights that I remember from Holland was General Marion Carl came to our house for what, dinner or what? Why was he there?
General Carl was over there. He was the Inspector General of the Marine Corps at the time. And he was over on a mission and happened to drop by the Netherlands. Because I was a Marine there, he came and visited us. And yes, he had dinner with us at an Ypersstraat. And it was a very nice visit. He's quite a nice guy.
I remember that I was a total fanboy because I was a big World War II aficionado at that time, building models and so forth. So I had a book called Fighter Aces of World War II, and he was in that book, and he actually signed the book for me. So that was pretty cool. So the ambassador during our tour in The Hague was William J. Mittendorf, later Secretary of the Navy. So he played in our lives for years after that. As I remember, a great guy, and actually ran into him when you were going to the War College years later. When I mentioned I was having some trouble getting into the Naval Academy, and he said, I'm confident that you'll make it eventually. That was a real morale boost for me as I was struggling to get in my first look. And then we wind up, after that 3 amazing years in Holland, you go back to Iwakuni for another tour. What were your jobs during that tour?
When I reported to Iwakuni, my first job was the commanding officer of the Marine Air Base Squadron, which are the air controllers, the MPs, all of the folks who serve a Marine Air Group, the guys who put out the AMT-2 matting. And later on, during that tour, perhaps 5 or 6 months in, the group commander needed a squadron commander for headquarters and maintenance squadron, and so I was given that job.
During that tour, we were living in Traverse City, Michigan, near your parents. That's where I went to 9th and half of 10th grade. And then you come back and we wind up getting orders to Cherry Point, North Carolina, and we lived on base there. So during that tour, you had, let's just call it an unorthodox transition from one billet into a squadron CO job. So talk to us about that.
So I came back to Cherry Point as a lieutenant colonel. And in short order, I was told you are going to go to 121 again. Except guess what? 121 is not flying the A4 anymore. They've got the A6E. And guess how much time I had in the A6? Right around nothing to 0 hours. And the 121 had had the A6 for a while. So it wasn't a bunch of newbies. They were old A6 drivers in that thing. And the A6 community is like every other community in any service, very tight. So here came this A4 squadron commander, and there are a bunch of A6 lieutenant colonels around that probably would have liked the job. And they probably wondered, how did he get it? I don't know how I got it, but I do know later on I found out who gave it to me. And the commanding general of the 2nd Marine Aircraft Wing, and who was one of the last of the great guys from World War II. Anyway, I went to the A6s and in short order was adopted by them when they realized that I could fly an airplane, and I had a few good ideas. And as a matter of fact, VMAAW 121, Marine Attack Squadron All-Weather 121, became one of the premier squadrons of the Marine Corps. We were chosen to represent the Marine Corps on some NATO exercises in Norway, in which we flew across the Atlantic. All of our airplanes made it. No borrowed tails, no borrowed airplanes. Then, not much later on, we went to Sigonella, Italy, again representing the Marine Corps in NATO exercises in Sigonella. And we again took all of our airplanes across and back. And I don't take credit for that, but I do give credit to my maintenance group, because it didn't happen very often that you could get all your birds across, and especially in a complicated aircraft like the A6, the A6E.
So I think the viewers have to appreciate just how unorthodox by modern standards your training track into the CO job was. Now, you mentioned before we started shooting that in the Marine Corps this was no big deal, that you would basically be a direct input to a squadron. Because when we're thinking these days, first you're the XO for a year and a half, and then you're the CO. Further, as you said, communities tend to be pretty insular. And so you're a light attack guy, basically, as an A4 guy. Here are these medium attack guys. Also, half the ready room is bombardier navigators, where you've never flown with a second guy in the airplane. This is also your first 2-engine jet. There must have been a learning curve, and also, as you said, they learned to appreciate you, but it wasn't like self-evident at the beginning.
No, it wasn't. Thank God I arrived.
Yeah.
No, I was under great suspicion. My executive officer and my operations officer, you could see them scratching their heads saying, how did this ever happen?
So you wound up flying with a senior BN at first to try to show you the ropes, and what is a BN for? Because you're kind of a single seat guy, as we NFOs say.
And this guy, Harry Kling, was a wonderful BN. and he covered up a load of mistakes that I made.
So the other thing I will mention in terms of how that time in your career influenced my life is one of your BNs was a Naval Academy graduate, Class 72, Harry Spees, who flew with you a lot. He also sailed with us a lot because we were at this time doing a lot of yacht racing across the Neuse River in Oriental, North Carolina. So Harry was one of our crew in those days. He was the primary, if not singular, influence of me wanting to attend the Naval Academy. Now, we did lose Harry. I saw him years later at the Naval Institute West conference when I was at military.com, and I was happy to have one final conversation. But I will say, he did mention that flying with you was a challenge. And he loved you very much. But as a Rio that's flown with all manner of pilots, I get it. Right, because I flew with some F-8 guys that, their attitude towards a Rio was a little different than a guy who had flown F-14s for his whole career, and I'm sure it was true with BNs flying with A6 babies versus you, which was a direct input from the A4 community. But again, he mentioned the bottom line was the squadron was fantastic under your leadership, and things really got better, and so. What do you remember about the capability of that airplane? And if I could get you to compare it to the A4, what was the A6 in terms of payload and precision and all-weather capability that the A4 didn't have?
The A6 was a wonderful machine. I look at it now, and let me just mention one time when a NATO exercise, when we're up in Norway, and the Panzers, the German Panzers were acting as the aggressors, and we clobbered them with the A6 at night, and they couldn't believe we could count how many tanks there were, we knew where they were, and we knew how to destroy them. There wasn't another airplane around that could do those missions.
Next tour, you go to the War College in Newport?
War College in Newport. My first several months there were normal War College things of talking history, strategy, and so forth. Second semester, I was asked if I would write a portion of aviation operations and desert warfare. As you know, at that time, desert warfare was not even on the horizon. And for the next several months, next 6 months, I did research on desert warfare back from World War II and went out to 29 Palms, which is the Marine Corps, was at that time the Marine Corps Desert Warfare place. Talked to forward air controllers, talked to maintenance guys, talked to other things of the infrastructure of what you need to do, what you need to watch out for, and wrote my piece on it, which is still in the archives.
Fast forward 13 years, and you were prescient in your choice of topics because now we're doing Desert Storm.
Little did I know at the time I was writing it. When I came out of the War College, the Marine Corps was wondering, where do we go from here? And they had an advanced study group that was located in Quantico, Virginia. It worked directly for the Commandant of the Marine Corps. I was sent to the advanced study group. Initially waited there as sort of the adjunct to the boss of the advanced study group until I was promoted to colonel, and when I was promoted to colonel, then I became boss of the advanced study group, and we did the study of where do we go from here, which was at the time very controversial. The Marine Corps was, again, just like after World War II, was decided, well, kind of in the way. Where do they fit? Are they a ceremonial group or are they a fighting group? If they're a fighting group, how can they, how do they fight? And our study group addressed that.
So then you get orders to be the CO of MAG 12, and you go back to Iwakuni.
Back to Iwakuni for my last time. And it had changed considerably from the 1960s, of course, this time. The Quonset huts were gone. I as a group commander, had a little bungalow, which, talking to my granddaughter, is not there anymore. And my granddaughter is at Iwakuni.
We should mention that my niece and Dad's granddaughter is a Navy wife. Her husband is a Super Hornet pilot in one of my old squadrons, the Diamondbacks. So it's the family business. So, that's very, very poetic. So, also poetic is two of your former squadrons are in this air group, specifically 223, the Bulldogs, and this is now basically your third tour associated with the Green Knights, JO, CO, and now the air group commander. So that was very cool. So what did you get to fly during this tour? What kind of airplanes were you flying mostly?
I flew the A6s and the A4s, and we had, I think, some T1As. I flew those, which were the later model of a T-33. A lot of flying.
So when you think about going from the farm country of Elk Rapids to 30-year career and retiring as a colonel who'd had command at every level, how would you summarize all of that?
I was led initially by World War II Marines, and later by Korea Marines, and later served with Vietnam Marines, and have served with Marines since then. And I'm proud to wear that title of United States Marine.
Dad, I want to thank you for sitting down and telling this story in its entirety. We've never really gone through it with this level of detail, so I appreciate you taking the time. I thank you as an American for your 30 years of service. I love you. I am lucky to have you as my main influence. You are the reason I got into naval aviation. You also influenced your middle son, who rose to the rank of staff sergeant, and your grandson, my eldest, who is currently a captain in the Marine Corps Reserves. So thank you very much for all of that, and thank you for coming by the channel today.
You make me very proud, even more proud than being a Marine, of being your father. Thank you.
All right, that'll do it for this episode. Please subscribe, like, comment, check the links for merch. If you'd like to help support the channel, please use the super thanks, the heart icon below, or become a patron at patreon.com/WardCarroll. And in the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again soon.